The limbic system and the reticular formation are two functional systems that work together for a common purpose. So we consider them functional brain systems because they're not just confined to one area of the brain, but they're located through two or more regions of the brain. We'll begin with a brief look at the limbic system, which is made up of multiple cerebral and diencephalon structures. Now, these are going to process and experience emotions. So sometimes we just call the limbic system the emotional brain. So the structures of this system form sort of a ring or a border around the diencephalon, as you can see here in the picture. So this is the area of the diencephalon. All of this in the darker purple makes up the limbic system. So let's take a look at the limbic system. Again, there are multiple brain areas in the cerebrum and the diencephalon that process and experience emotions. Psychosomatic illnesses generally fall into a couple of different categories. One is when people develop physical symptoms and there's not really a medical cause. So psych refers to the brain, somatic refers to the body. So it's basically you think yourself into an illness. The other is when you have conditions that cause distressing symptoms that are due to psychological stress. So physical symptoms induced by physiological stress. Now, you can also exacerbate or worsen symptoms due to your thoughts about those particular symptoms. You can talk yourself into thinking that you have an illness. Now, just a brief look at some of the areas. The fornix links the hippocampus to the other limbic structures, but the hippocampus is responsible for memories. So we form long-term memories, and in addition to that, we form and store new memories. The amygdaloid body recognizes anger and facial expressions and allows us to assess danger or elicit a response. The cingulate gyrus is important in helping us to express emotions with gestures, whether it's facial expressions or body movements. And then the olfactory portion simply ties an emotion to an odor. Think about the favorite thing someone has ever cooked for you and how it smelled and how happy it made you to eat that food that somebody you cared about made for you. So you have an emotional tie to the smell of that food. Well, that is also processed in the limbic system because it is an emotional response. The second functional brain system we'll look at is the reticular formation. So it projects vertically through the midbrain, the pons, and the medulla, and it's just a loosely organized mass of gray matter that we call the reticular formation. So if you look over here at the image, everything in the red, the blue, and this purple is part of this reticular formation. So the motor component of that communicates with the spinal cord and helps to regulate skeletal muscle tone, especially when our muscles are at rest. So it also assists with reflexive motor functions such as respiration, blood pressure, and heart rate by working with the autonomic centers that are located within the medulla and the pons of the brainstem. The sensory component of the reticular formation is responsible for making sure the cerebrum knows that there's incoming sensory information. So we call that part that you see over here with all these little purple lines going out through the cerebrum, that is the reticular activating system. And it contains sensory axons that project into the cerebral cortex. So this reticular activating system processes visual, auditory, and stimuli from touch, and uses this information to keep us mentally alert. But it also allows us to filter out familiar and weak signals, such as if you are sitting in the classroom, you filter out the sound of the air conditioner or the projector or the traffic outside the window. Now, when you are asleep or under the influence of certain drugs and medications, then you are inhibiting or providing less stimulation to the reticular activating system, and that is what allows us to go to sleep. Now, before we look at these last two bullets on coma and vegetative state and talking about unconsciousness, let's understand what consciousness is. And it is an awareness of sensation and voluntary movement and the activities that are necessary for higher brain processing. So it involves a lot of the large brain areas of the cortex, and the highest state of consciousness and cortical activity is simply alertness, when you're responsive, aware of self, and you're oriented to your place, your person, and the time. So when you're asleep, you have reduced consciousness. Now, this is not pathological. It is just that we don't stay aware of everything when we are asleep. A coma is a deep state of unconsciousness that you can't wake somebody up from, even with repetitive or painful stimuli. The person is still alive but unable to respond and not aware. So a coma is the deepest level of unconsciousness. A vegetative state, especially a persistent vegetative state, is a long-term condition where the person can be either unconscious or awake, but doesn't have self-awareness or awareness of one's surroundings. So people in this state will usually exhibit some reflexive or spontaneous movements, such as moving your eyes, crying, or smiling, but there is usually no purposeful movement.